service descriptions for quite a while. I go even further back. I used to run the private networking product group for Motorola. Codex and Stratacom was one of the products that I was rolling out, and I must say that when I was getting a Velo Cloud briefing recently, I looked at the slides and they could have been Stratacom slides. They were very similar at one level. But of course, lots have changed, and it's not the same old wide area networking. This is very much a cloud-driven change to the market. And the users that we've been working with and have been speaking to, so we started, like most people in the SD-WAN area, working with the very large multinational corporations, many of them not using service providers, many of them doing it by themselves or with their system integrators. But what they all talk about is it's cloud-driven, it's intended to accelerate their ability to transform their business, and they're looking for, in addition to speed, quality, cost control, they really want to up the velocity of their internal digital transformation, and they want to gain not just speed, not just global reach, but also a lot of information along the way that helps them fine-tune the processes. And one of the things that got them hooked early on is bring your own carrier, because one of the challenges we'll put to the service provider community is, I think, back in the early internet days, we were kind of the enablers and the exciting crowd. Over the years, I think the wide area network has been viewed more as something that slows things down, that's too complex, and that is not helping in the transformation of these businesses. And it's how we as an industry change that perception, but also change ourselves so that, as you've been hearing, it's a very common theme in the cloud application space, becoming much more involved in the business processes and solving the customer's issues rather than it just being a technology thing. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to turn to the panel and ask them first just to introduce themselves and say where they are in the wide area, on the SD-WAN journey. And I think there should be one more slide. I don't know how to move them here. With pictures? If not, you can introduce yourselves anyway. Start with Connor.
Hi, my name's Conrad Mallon. I'm the Chief Network Architect for SSE Enterprise Telecom. We've done a relatively good job over the last few years of building a good, solid infrastructure, or in SDN speak, an underlay that we sell largely to other carriers at the moment, and we are in the process of working out how best to build overlay and managed services across that infrastructure to attack the enterprise market. But we're right at the vendor selection phase at the moment.
Hi everyone, I'm Nico Colli from Colt around technical development. Colt is a global network and voice provider. We have built an SD-WAN proposition about 18 months ago or so early in the market in Europe, and then extended to the global coverage. So we have a capability which is mature. We built it as an extension of our MPLS VPN traditional service, which we have tens of thousands of sites. So it's, I would say, still early stage compared to that market maturity, but 18 months old.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Nick Holland. I'm one of 3 CTOs at 8x8. I specialise in contact centres. 8x8 is a unified voice video data communication company. It goes over the top of the internet, and that's why it creates a QoS challenge, and that's why 8x8 is interested in SD-WAN technology specifically. It sits on the edge, we don't have to deal with the internet bit in the middle. I thought I'd just share with you an example rather than talk about SD-WAN, and I'm sure you wouldn't know much about it. I thought I'd actually give you an example of why getting it wrong can get you fined by a regulator. So this is a real world example, and the example is predictive dialing. So how many are familiar with that? It's where the predictive dialer calls lots of phone numbers from a list. It's when someone picks up their phone, a waiting agent then gets the call connected to them. The agent screen is refreshed. It's refreshed from the cloud. So the performance of that screen refresh, which contains who they've just called and why they're calling them, and if it's outsourced content on that centre, who they've actually called from. All that information is displayed to the agent from the cloud. And this is the critical bit. So this is why it's important. If it takes more than 2 seconds for an agent to start talking to a person, Ofcom in the UK will consider that to be a silent call, and that is illegal. So that is why SD-WAN tech and such is so critical to that particular type of example. You do that repetitively, Ofcom will fine you up to £2 million, so it's not trivial. And in the US, same sort of regulations. There it's per instance rather than per investigation, and there have been multi-billion-dollar fines for getting it wrong. So hopefully that explains why I'm very interested in the subject of SD-WAN, why we're using this technology in 8x8 and why I'm here today.
Hi, I'm Claudio from Tata. So probably a similar time frame to Mirko at Colt. We launched our 2 variants of SD-WAN. Like Colt, we launched a Versa-based service and also a home-baked service, our own one. So our own one has been on an evolutionary path trying to solve the kinds of problems that SD-WAN was aiming to solve. So that had evolved anyway, and that formally became an SD-WAN service around about that time. And we launched Versa at that same time. So we have 2 different approaches that makes life really interesting because we've got to properly qualify what's right for the customer. We want something, an evolutionary approach where it's trusted technology that's just evolved, or something that's really brand new and can really transform them. So that's where we are.
Start here. So hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Samir Desai, Global Product Lead at GTT. So very quickly, GTT is a global network and cloud connectivity provider. Similar story to both my other service provider colleagues, where recently within the SD-WAN market, we've partnered with VeloCloud over the last 18 months or so. Our approach is pretty much where we use VeloCloud as the technology provider to create a GTT hosted, managed, over-the-top solution that runs on our core network backbone, or an MPLS backbone, and we leverage the diversity of our local access capability, whether it's broadband into our network or third-party internet resale, wireless access, effectively any type of last mile access solution we would enable with an SD-WAN solution using the developer approach and provide that homogeneous network experience globally. So yes, it's we got into the SD-WAN market for pretty much all the classic reasons why I guess all enterprise customers are looking at as a way of managing corporate network, as a way of managing costs, as a way of capping MPLS investment. And what we're seeing with a lot of the early adopters is a lot of those use cases are certainly true, but there's some surprising new ones that have come up through our experience of it. And I guess we can go into more detail through the conversation. So that's me.
Okay, great. So I wanted to, before we get into the most important part, which are the use cases and how customers are driving, what segments you're going after, I just wanted to ask particularly, the early adopters of things like Versa and VeloCloud, which are 2 of the well-known solutions. There are others in the room. I don't that mean to belittle any of them. There's many of them. But as a service provider, first of all, how easy was it to build a managed offering on top of it? And second of all, is it, kind of on a 80-20 scale, or is it most of the service wrap within the solution provider, or did you have to build a lot around it? So I'll start with Mirko.
Yeah, so as I said, we started 18 months ago. I think the situation that we have today is pretty different than what it was at that time. I cannot say it was mature at that time. We actually started working with Versa very early, probably at least a couple of years before, when they were still in a garage, and we helped them shape the capability. It has been difficult in the sense that we had to drive that development, so we did some level of co-development together. if I compare today what's available, as I said, we come from the traditional MPLS VPN service offering. We offer global wide network solutions to customers, and if you compare it with that, you can certainly still see quite a difference in terms of capabilities. So the traditional VPN is more feature rich. However, now you compare it with new type of capabilities. I think Samir was touching on multiple access choices, which is one of the key capabilities you can put in place with SD-WAN, which wasn't possible with MPLS VPN. So you start to see the benefits of new technology, overlay networking coming together, the possibility to steer in traffic is something you cannot do with your technology.
Was it something like you had a team of 2 or 3 people working on, or 20, 30?
I mean, we're not a very large technology organization, so I would say probably about now it's about 15 or so people working on it. We have a long tradition in SDN and NFV, and at that time it was more research and development that was done.
Okay. How about that?
Yeah, so some of the early use cases for SD-WAN that were on the market very quickly were very well suited to retail, large volumes of sites. I think Gap was an early adopter as an example, right? So, and that doesn't suit the type of business we're going after. We don't have deep national networks. We focus on multinationals. Multinationals were going through a period where they wanted to standardize across the globe. They wanted cloud enablement, and they also wanted an easy way to roll out unified comms. So it's been quite a tough journey, because that's a much more complex set of demands on an SD-WAN vendor. And in terms of how difficult it is, I can tell you it was more difficult than the vendors suggested initially.
I still remember a Riverbed ad that said 4-year-old. Professional engineer. We're still helping configure something that works. So how about your experience in detail?
Yeah, so interesting. So being a largely US-focused global carrier, which is obviously changing now with the recent acquisition, one thing we found is our legacy retail base. So GTD is fairly strong within the retail base in the US. We've got the likes of the young brands, Papa John's, and a lot of those distributed type stores or restaurant type organizations as our clients. And what we found is that the choice of the VeloCloud partnership was a surprising tie into exactly those types of customers, and you can map onto those very specific use cases very quickly. So the irony was, it was very easy to jump into the market with a pre-packaged SD-WAN provider like VeloCloud from an end-to-end sense, and we actually had a network capability and a target vertical base that suited that sort of proposition. But I guess to Claudio's point and Murphy's point, I think what we're now finding is that as we now grow the base to other verticals, and as you go up the value stack to kind of more hybrid VPN type integration, it's been us in the challenge, the scale is now becoming more and more complex. How do you get that functionality more bespoke? How do we work with a vendor that can meet those types of challenges? And maybe Versa is the closest, but I don't think there's any pointed SD-WAN vendor out there that can meet that entire spectrum from small SMB type base, like from all the way up to the top. Right? So it's an interesting, and then to the point about the level of resources we've had. Well, GTD, we're generally a fairly lean organization, myself included, 5 or 10.
Their resources double every month, I think.
Exactly.
You just bought all the burgers.
Absolutely. So it was a low barrier to entry, but I think that the resourcing impact is getting to the open standards SDN world will certainly have
It's
more.
gonna grow.
It's
Yeah.
going to grow.
So, Conrad, you're just still in the selection phase, so.
Did we
And
help?
you're a national. And another thing about you is you probably are one of the few who really understand wide area networking and open voice at the same time. Having run both kinds of businesses. So, what's driving your selection?
So effectively, we don't have a platform at the moment to address the enterprise market. We've expanded our reach significantly across the UK, which is very capital intensive. If you're rolling out dark fibre networks and you're connecting more and more points, and that is extending our addressable market as far as the wholesale space is concerned. But it doesn't really help us with the retail space unless we've got some sophisticated product set. So we're not looking to update an existing product offering, we're looking to enter a new market effectively. So we have a slightly different view on things to some of the other guys. We have no existing revenues in that space that we're looking to capitalize. So we think we can be quite disruptive when we actually get round to doing it. Now, the challenge has been, I think I'm the centre of this Venn diagram. I know all of these guys. I think there's not anybody at this table that I've known for less than 10 years, and we talk a lot about stuff and about how difficult the challenges have been. And I talk a lot with some of the vendors. Being a UK national carrier, I don't have the same addressable market that these guys do necessarily. I don't have the same lucrative and European or global potential market to tap into. So consequently, my R&D budget is going to be small. It just is.
Which might be the case of a few of the audience as well.
And so the thing that has been the biggest challenge for me over the past 18 months as we've been looking, there have been two things. The first one is it's really important that you understand what systems that you want to integrate with that you currently have already, look at your back office systems, but also if you've got an underlay network, if you want to integrate with that, making sure that you've industrialised the way that that is provisioned and built is really important. But the other piece is that for much of the last 18 months, people have been saying they've got a solution for you, but as soon as you start talking to them, they've got a quarter of a solution, and I need you to put in something else from somebody else and something else from somebody else. To the point we actually released an RFP last year in around about the November time frame, or it might have even been the October time frame, where we actually had 7 different lots of different things that we were asking in order to build this SDN solution or SD-WAN solution. We decided to cancel that because clearly the integration work is going to be really, really complicated. And yeah, Mirko and the other guys here are giving me nightmares with some of the stories that they've had. I think a lot of them are out the other side of it now, or largely out the other side, but I think there have been some growing pains, it's fair to say, that have been hard and difficult. And I can't get 15 engineers to work with me, so I need to get a solution which is much more turnkey and much more ready to go out of the box. And I'm still struggling to find the right partner for that.
And user expectation is pretty high. People talk about business-driven outcomes and tank-based networking and lots of fancy terms out there. But I think at least in the large multinationals, they're thinking they're going to be able to vaguely express a business need, and it's going to roll out, and they're going to see. So how do you guys balance between what you do as a managed service, those that you're offering, and what you let the customers do? How many knobs do you let them play with? And are you anywhere near or business-driven outcomes at this point? All right, I'll start all the way at the end.
Interesting question. I think a lot of the time you have direct messaging from technology vendors themselves, and developers included, that quite frankly confuse the message. So there's this whole piece about doing it as DIY, you have absolute self-control, look how easy it is to implement it within a corporate network. Well, I think you're probably finding that through some of the experiences we're sharing, how difficult it potentially can be, based on the experiences we've had. But going back to the question, one of the key challenges we have is, where is that balancing act between providing a fully managed service where we do all the configuration management control on behalf of the client, and at what point do we start sort of not letting it out from a client self-serve point of view? The danger is, of course, that a client may inadvertently set up a business policy that could probably bring down not only a location but the entire network, then you're in this situation. Well, okay, who's responsible for it? Right? Is it us? Is it them? Is it a combination of the two? How do you go back to a steady state? So I think some carriers in our market are maybe further down the self-serve path than others. We certainly are taking a much more cautious approach. I think our view is that look, we're a managed service provider, managed SD-WAN service provider. We will provide the control management. Blame us if you get it wrong, but you will certainly get the benefit of the visibility and the application performance management. But any changes, we will do for you. You know, and as time goes by, as we start putting more guardrails in our capability in our systems, maybe we start letting it out a bit more.
So, Nick, your company's probably the closest to a lot of the people in the audience. Think of 8x8 as mainly an over-the-top provider. And at the point, certainly, at one point arguing don't really need to control the access. We come across over the top.
I think over the years, bandwidth has been elastic, so you've got huge services, what do we do with it? And then 5 minutes later, Facebook comes along and uses it all.
Yeah.
And we need quality of service, we need to know that it's going to work. We have compliant, well, I mentioned some compliance reasons why that's required. And we don't want to deal with it. We want to know that the network is going to work. And the reality is that we have to help the customer select a service provider so that it does work. Because we don't want to be that service provider. We've got our own services. We're doing unified comms. We don't want to do the actual wires. That's not an area that we want to step into if we can avoid it. And SD-WAN in general, we've been working with Ariane, we've got some successful deployments there. We've been about several vendors that we've worked with. But we're trying to avoid being the people educating the customer as to how to solve the problem. We really want that to be every service provider on the planet has got that solution already. And so we're just one of the many. So that UCAS is our space, but one of those cloud providers that the customer is knowing that it's going to work. Their service provider understands what we need. And that's 5 years away probably. No, it's probably 4 years. But that's
So in
my
addition
group.
to the quality aspect, do you see SD-WAN, playing a role of breaking up the geography barrier as well? Because from what we see these days, there's no such thing as a purely national customer anymore. I mean, they can be nationally weighted, but all of a sudden they have a need that pops up in some strange place in the world. And that's traditionally been a huge challenge.
It is now.
Yeah.
I mean, even when you go and pay good money for connections in strange places, they're not really that great. So the ISPs contend everything, the carriers even, dare I say it, often contend stuff. So it's quite difficult to get your packets through, and I think that's this technology is.
It's also not from the cult.
Yes. So, yes, City of London Telecom. Certainly my personal experience has been I get dragged into very difficult conversations with customers who just, but this works, why doesn't that? Well, that's, I can't answer.
It works in my hotel room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why can't we roll it out across the entire enterprise?
It works perfectly at home with my £22 connection. Why doesn't it work in the office?
But in the end, you get what you pay for. I think we have a global coverage, and you can buy cheap internet access, or bring your own device and bring your own access as well. I mean, there is lots of experience we have built, and I think everybody has been playing the global field, providing connectivity across the globe. Today we do MPLS and NI, we do Ethernet and NIs, and now we do SD-WAN local connections. But again, you get what you pay for. If you buy cheap local internet access and may not be providing the right level of quality, if you really need critical infrastructure in a certain place, you can still buy MPLS-based or Ethernet-based local access.
Sometimes you get what you pay for. I must say, because I run a little tiny hosted business, and sometimes the internet performs better than the
Cool. Sure. Yeah.
it's a mixed bag. I can't see very well with the bright lights, but I just wanted to look out. Are there questions from the audience? Because I've been asking a lot. Does anybody have questions? Nope. Can I just see a show of hands, I'll get the audience warmed up. How many of you are from service providers? And how many of you, we did research and we said of our whole base, about 30% are thinking of rolling out SD-WAN in the short term. How about inside this room? How many of you have any intention to roll out SD-WAN in the next year or so? Good. So you're interested? No questions? No? All right, I'll keep going then.
I've got a question.
Oh, you got a question?
So we're a small service provider, Duncan Frenchman, Zoom Talk, and we see the value in SD-WAN. Our challenge is we just don't have the resource or the money to implement our own infrastructure. So how far off is SD-WAN as a service for people like us?
I think it's depending on which then technology provider you talk to. I think it's here already. So I'm not plugging Bella Cloud in any real way, but you know, if you take them as an example, that they have a hosted capability where effectively you're leveraging their pre-existing investment in gateways that they've already deployed out globally. I think they've got about 20-25 nodes all over the world, and effectively, you know, you become a reseller of the capability plus add on a bit of your value add, or you could go all the way to the other end of the spectrum where you could then take those gateways or those VM, set up your own VM environments and have your own gateways within your network, right? So I think what I'm finding certainly with some of the vendors that you have this SD-WAN as a service approach, but it sort of depends on which technology provider to go down and which vendor you pick.
How about you guys yourselves? Are any of you wholesaling SD-WAN? Or
So they are. So I'm actually having a conversation with some of his new colleagues over at Interim around the possibility of a white label version of their Edge service, which is effectively an SD-WAN offering. My personal concern about that, I've had this conversation with Samir and I've had it with Mark Lewis, who's the guy who's developing it, is that it's quite a sticky solution. I want something that I can start off myself, or start off as an outsourced and then gradually take on more of it myself. I think the problem with the Interim solution maybe is that it's not flexible. You know, I think once I'm there, I'm always going to be an Interim customer. I'm not going to be able to develop my own path, and I'll be tied to their roadmap. So, but there are other people as well. I think there's a bunch of guys that SSE have been talking about for some customer applications called Cloud9, who do something similar. They offer white label services. So there are white label services out there. I think the challenge for someone like yourself, and certainly someone like myself, maybe more so myself, I don't know, because SSE is quite a large organisation, is I don't want to buy a service from a third party that is always going to be a service from a third party. Yep. I want to kickstart my own development and eventually bring it in-house. And that's the challenge that I'm struggling with at the moment, is finding the right partner to do that with. Although I've had some pretty good conversations over the last couple of days.
Is there other questions?
Just wondering how much difference you see between the various SD-WAN companies. Is versus that different than Bella Cloud? Is it that different than the Tower?
I think sometimes, sometimes you sort of look at it and go, oh, they're all the same, and then another day you think they're very different. If you want a complex solution, there isn't, I think of a complex multinational customer who's moving stuff into the cloud, who needs a hybrid WAN, they still need some MPLS, they're running, unified comms, they're running telepresence type stuff, so they don't trust the internet totally yet. Those mitigation features are not all fully there in all the SD-WAN vendors to run, telepresence over the internet to overcome that lack of behavior and routing issues. So, a complex hybrid WAN, it just makes network routing much more complex when you run it like that. And we find that, that's when the vendors can start to address that particular function now. At the moment, they've got other mitigating things that we all seem to have, like packet load balancing and forward error correction and things like that. But the real sort of qual type stuff to try and reserve bandwidth from the edge perspective is very highly variable. Ipanema, now in Ballista, they've had something that did that particular function very well for quite a long time. But a lot of the WAN vendors, they just, they haven't even brought this stuff out properly yet. It's a roadmap item. So that's a key difference.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. There is a clear differentiation between OTT type of solutions and infrastructure-based or network edge-based type of solutions. You can see that difference. A number of players in both spaces. It depends on what you need. The approach we're taking, we do provide MPLS-based services. We have large enterprises, medium to large enterprises. It makes sense for us to provide an infrastructure-based solution that can cover both domains. I do agree on the technical complexity. I think then you look at the level of maturity. None of the providers, again, whatever they tell you, are at the stage that everything is fully mature, fully complete. Also, maybe touching back on the point of how difficult it is. We're now running at a pace of development which is much faster than we used to be in the past. It's more agile based, and so we are to some extent bleeding edge and bringing in capabilities which are not yet fully mature. And I think you would find that regardless of which choice you make, that's the norm today.
In terms of customers, there was originally a lot of focus around the very large multinationals, Cisco quite aggressively there now, as well as some of the carriers. But what do you guys view as the sweet spot, either in terms of a particular vertical or a particular size of customer? And where do you think SD-WAN will be the most strategic for your business?
So I think it's going to be very different for me, probably from most of the other guys. Obviously, we're a UK national provider. Yeah, we think that in a lot of cases, customers are going to want to have that reassurance of owned infrastructure as an underlay rather than internet services. So anywhere with a deep UK penetration, we see a lot of potential in the financial sector. We see a lot of potential for more over-the-top type services in the retail sector where the bandwidth isn't quite so critical. And we see a lot of opportunity in our own utility sector. Obviously, our parent is a power company. There are lots of power, water, gas companies that have a lot of employees up and down the UK, and we see that as a real opportunity, especially given we obviously have the capability to develop something specifically for our parent group, and hopefully be able to deliver that on to other utility companies. But I guess that's going to be very difficult.
Would you include analytics in that, or just maybe? How much of this is going to be application data driven versus wide area network?
So our view is, we will start with rudimentary services, but we want to build on as much additional functionality and capability as we can. Going all the way up the protocol stack, we're talking about things like analytics and talking about the security and hosted. I mean, we do a bunch of stuff already for SSE Group around contact center and telephony. But we don't sell our services externally. We do manage LAN services for SSE Group. All of those things are things that potentially we can see partners of an SDN-based offering right across our external customers as well. But and we're using SSE Group if they let us as a guinea pig. Don't compare us with that.
Okay. So anybody else have a very different focus for their customers?
Yeah. Mine are manufacturers are pretty hot for us. So companies that are 2 to 30,000 employees.
2 to 30,000, you say?
Yeah, 2,000.
That's quite a range.
Yeah. But we got to. I think we got 2 customers that are in the low 40s. Right. If they go higher than that, we were saying earlier, if they go up towards the 100,000 employee mark, the IT behaviour is very different. They're too complicated. They're too tangled up in terms of adopting a managed service, which we want to offer.
Yeah.
So they want to help. Yeah, they have to build it and then integrate it with their systems. So we haven't had any successes with guys that are 100,000 employees yet. They want SD-WAN, but not as a managed services we're offering it.
There is a sweet spot in the middle, no?
Yes.
But I would say it's probably not that different from the experience we had with traditional Intela CPN. There is always a DIY company and the ones that want to do fully managed service. I don't see much of a difference. I mean, there are large enterprises in different sectors. Then, but I think something that is to some extent you were talking about how much control you can give to customers. That's another dimension that we didn't fully have before. We built, and maybe a bit more aggressive than others, built a fully on-demand portal capability and API-based capability. We don't let customers break the network, of course, but we do expose a lot of capabilities, policies, controls, and firewalls, and you can do many more things. We're talking about analytics. It's not easy, but it becomes easier as a foundation to start to build on top of SD-WAN with add-on capabilities.
Well, when we were looking at different SD-WAN providers, we sort of split into two. There were those that try to control things at the edge only. There were those that were trying to do it perhaps more as a service provider, where they were saying, okay, we've got something to do as well. Pipe all your traffic up here, and we're going to manage it in a slightly different way. And they were able to provide things like service and contact protection, which you can't do from the edge until the network's gone. So there was some interesting differences on the capability of the provider. But that also drives, when we're talking to a customer, we're obviously interested in our service, but that differentiation can drive the conversation. We say, oh yeah, your contact centre, that's the space I'm interested in. It's definitely always going to be, it's not really subject to denial of service attack. It's this sensitive contact centre that deals with things that people don't like, that sort of thing. So that's bringing some success and functionalities that drive people in one direction.
Yeah. So I guess who's our sweet spot? Yeah, I think what you mentioned it, it's that classic middle type client. So anyone who's distributed in terms of the location, manufacturing is a key target of ours. R&D, retail, as I mentioned, or heritage in the retail space. So I guess from a company size point of view, yeah, that middle market MNC that's distributed is, I guess, the first point. And then in terms of what they're specifically trying to address, it's that classic, hey look, I've got a secondary branch location, tertiary site, call it what you will. I need predictable, good connectivity. I need to manage the bandwidth at that location. I'm looking at multiple broadband type paths without having to jump into an MPLS investment. Can SD-WAN solve that particular use case? And that's essentially that target use case type branch profile that we're trying to target for that particular type of customer.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've run out of time unless there's one more question from the audience. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up and I thank you guys